Imagine stepping out of the noise of Manhattan and into a church where time seems to fold in on itself. The priest isn't facing you, he's facing the same direction as you, toward an altar that looks nothing like a stage and everything like a gateway. The service is in a language you don't speak, punctuated by long stretches of silence. For many, this would feel foreign, but for a growing number of Jewish converts to Catholicism, it feels like coming home. Start with the direction of prayer. In Jewish tradition, the Talmud teaches that Jews outside Israel pray toward the land of Israel, in Israel toward Jerusalem, in Jerusalem toward the temple, and in the temple toward the Holy of Holies. This sacred direction, called Mizrah, meaning east, is based on Solomon's prayer in 1 Kings 8 and Daniel's practice of praying toward Jerusalem 3 times daily. Father Uwe Michael Lang of the London Oratory explains the sacred direction in Judaism is toward Jerusalem, or more precisely, toward the presence of the transcendent God, Shekinah, in the Holy of Holies, of the temple, as seen in Daniel 6:10. Even after the temple's destruction in 70 A.D., pious Jews continue facing Jerusalem when at prayer, expressing their hope for the coming of the Messiah and the rebuilding of the temple. Now here's what Jewish converts recognize immediately. The traditional Catholic practice of ad orientem, facing east, mirrors this ancient Jewish custom. Bishop Arthur Saratelli notes that Tertullian, 160 to 220 A.D., had to defend Christians against pagans who accused them of facing east to worship the sun. The early Christians no longer turned toward the earthly Jerusalem, but toward the new heavenly Jerusalem, seeing in the rising sun a symbol of the resurrection and second coming. For a convert from Judaism, this isn't a foreign innovation. It's the same posture of worship, facing the presence of God, now directed toward its fulfillment in Christ. Then there's the silence. The traditional Latin Mass contains the silent canon. The priest prays the most sacred parts of the Eucharist in a hushed voice. This resonates deeply with the Jewish understanding of the high priest on Yom Kippur, entering the Holy of Holies in silence, a moment so sacred that the people waited outside in breathless awe. Latin itself acts as a sacred tongue, much like Hebrew in the synagogue. It draws a clear line between the secular noise of the street and the sacred mystery of the altar. The 2023 National Eucharistic Revival materials note that the word sacrifice comes from the Latin for making sacred, and in ancient Jewish practice, worship was inconceivable apart from sacrifice. The Feast of the Presentation, February 2nd, known traditionally as Candlemas, demonstrates this Jewish Catholic continuity. Luke tells us the Holy Family offered a pair of doves or 2 young pigeons at the temple, following Levitical law for purification after childbirth. The prophet Simeon, waiting for the consolation of Israel, declared that the infant Jesus was a light for revelation to the Gentiles and for the glory of thy people Israel. A Catholic educator notes that the presentation of Jesus has deep Jewish roots and represents God himself returning to his temple in Jerusalem. This brings us to the heart of the matter. In ancient Judaism, sacrifice was central to worship. Mike Aquilina, writing for Angelus News, explains, in the Jerusalem temple, priests daily offered sacrifice on behalf of individuals and the entire nation. On Passover, they offered as many as 250,000 lambs. The Hebrew word for offering is korban, meaning to bring forward or offer, taking something common and dedicating it to God. The act was seen as establishing or restoring communion with God. As Father David Endress writes, when the people of Israel worshipped God, they offered a sacrifice, usually an animal that was ritually offered. Within Christian belief, the ultimate sacrifice is the death of Jesus. The letter to the Hebrews explains that Jesus' sacrifice on the cross is once for all, yet the Church participates in it through the Eucharist. The Catholic Telegraph clarifies, recognizing the Mass as a participation in the sacrifice on the cross, the Church Fathers clearly connected the Mass to sacrifice. For a Jewish convert, the modern emphasis on the Mass as merely a communal meal feels incomplete. The Passover Seder was a memorial, yes, but it pointed toward sacrifice. The traditional Roman rite, with its emphasis on the unbloody representation of Calvary, fulfills that expectation. One convert described it as finally understanding what the prophets meant, that worship isn't about entertaining the congregation, but about offering something worthy to God. As Alice Camille notes, even late Judaism had begun to steer away from the idea that ritual sacrifice alone was what God wanted. The sacrifice of praise was pleasing to God. But the Catholic Mass, in its traditional form, maintains both dimensions, the sacrifice of praise and the representation of Christ's once-for-all offering. In 2026, despite restrictions on the old rite, traditional parishes are resilient. They're often the ones filling the pews with young families, including Jewish converts, who find in these communities a preservation of high culture and deep tradition that feels authentic, a stark contrast to disposable aesthetics. For the Jewish convert, becoming Catholic isn't about erasing heritage, it's about seeing it completed. The Latin Mass preserves the veil of the temple, but it also invites believers to step through it. In the silence, the incense, and the ancient gestures, they are finding the Messiah they were waiting for, worshipped in the way their ancestors always knew he should be.